Welcome to the Powercat Podcast, the original K-State sports show. Here's your host, Tim Fitzgerald.
Welcome to another edition of the Powercat Podcast. Fitz and Gills and Cole. Your normal trio.
Colesies.
Oh, I like that, Colesies. You're going to get a lot of podcasts this week. It is, of course, a holiday week. So we're rolling this one out on the 3rd. I think we had a VIP one before this for only our subscribers. That appears at Go Powercat only. And then on Friday, we're going to have a recruiting pod. Not Friday. Friday?
The 4th, yeah.
Friday's the 4th. Then Friday, we'll have a recruiting pod. It's the 4th of July. And we will not have fireworks because I don't like loud booms. I also don't like Ryan Gilbert, but I invited him here to discuss these things. I think he'll be at the front and center of the VIP pod that we're going to record in a little bit as we tackle an interesting basketball topic for that. But we are sponsored by my good friend Gabriel. I got to say that because he's upstairs right now and he's got a hammer. He's working on our house at Gabriel at Helping Hands Remodeling, HKremodeler.com. If you've got a bath or a deck or some other stuff you need done to your house, apartment, not your apartment, your condo, your Airbnb, your rental. A couple folks have called him. He's very happy. So get on the books with him. As I said, he's upstairs right now giving us that deck refresh that we need horribly. Our deck's a mess. It's actually in pretty good shape. I was a little surprised, but I don't know. It's kind of like me. Surprising. On with your show here. Questions from Wabash Station. Ready, boys?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. First one up is from Tulsa Cat 43, who is a wild card that could maybe flash on offense and defense this year or could finally come into their own. Who's going to be flashing, Gilbert? And that you can't say you.
Not me?
Not you. Can't
my answer. I think Asa Newsom is the first guy that came to my mind, right? He should need no endorsement from anybody on his upside and his potential. Just never has been able to stay healthy, and that is a legitimate concern. You're going to have to be on the field to make plays and be a wild card, but his upside is it's through the roof.
Are we talking about guys who we think are going to have big impacts or who are going to show flashes? Because I think that those are two very different questions, right? I mean, could maybe flash, meaning this person's going to have a really good game. Like, think about Jaden Jackson at times the last few years. Like, that's a guy who really flashed. Now, he wasn't necessarily consistent. The West Virginia game, that popped up on my Twitter feed the other day, and it was literally 2 plays, 84 yards, all of Jaden Jackson. He finished the game with 2 catches and 84 yards. Like, he showed flashes. So are we talking about that, or are we talking about consistency? Gilbert, on defense, I totally agree with you on Asa Newsom as far as consistency goes. I think that's going to be a guy who's going to be on the field a lot. But if we're going to talk about flashes, I'm going to say Jayshon Ross, because that is a guy who we've heard really good things about. Think about Toby Osensami was another one of those guys who flashed last year, who they're counting on being consistent this year. I think Jayshon Ross on the defensive side of the ball is going to be that guy who shows flashes of brilliance. Now, the question is, how are they going to be able to bottle up that consistency from Jayshon Ross? I don't know, but I think that guy's going to play. I think he's going to play a lot. I think he's going to show some really good flashes. And so, obviously, we're sticking with the defensive side of the ball right now, but I'm going to say Jayshon Ross.
Interesting. I'm going to go with the guy that actually did flash at times last year and show some stuff. And I have a feeling he's going to move into more of a full-time role, and that's Jack Fabris. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's a very instinctive player, which is basically a requirement at safety. You got to be 2 steps ahead of the other side of the ball, and he's got that sense of being around the ball and creating havoc. I think he's going to be showing out as a really strong safety for years to come for Kansas State.
Yeah.
Offensively.
Yeah. I was just going to say, before we talk about offensively, the fact that all 3 of us have 3 different players at 3 different levels of the defense, it's probably a good sign. Offensively, I'm just going to say it, guys. Lincoln Cure. I have been the one banging the drum for Lincoln Cure the entire offseason. when Ryan Wallace was here, he was always the hold your horses kind of guy. And I still maintain that I think Lincoln Cure, again, are we talking about flashes? If we're talking about flashes, Lincoln Cure will have flashes. Think back to Avery Johnson's freshman season, that 5-touchdown performance against Texas Tech. That was a major flash. I would anticipate that at some point, Lincoln Cure has a game where people circle it and they say, this is the kind of player that Lincoln Cure can be. Now, is that going to be 3 catches for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns because he gets targeted in the red zone? Maybe. But whatever that looks like, he is going to have an impact at some point throughout the season, and it will be a pretty big splash impact, I believe, at some point.
Okay. I struggle with offense. You look at the last part of the question, it says, finally come into their own. So that would mean a returning player, someone that's been around that just hasn't been able to maybe scratch the surface. And, a lot of the pass catchers for this team are going to, the Wildcats, Tibbs and Bradley, newcomers. Lincoln Cure is obviously in his first year in the program. And it's tough to label one tight end as being maybe that difference maker, that X factor throughout the entirety of the season, just because of the enormous depth in that room. So I think Lincoln Cure, he's obviously in his first year, but he seems like the guy that, everybody's excited about him. I get it, Cole, but he's still the one that can just shock you with his upside, because he's the first 5-star, right, ever to come to Kansas State. So it's a talent that we've never seen before. We've never covered before. And his first game in the Bill, what have you, your first time seeing him, you're going to go, okay, wow, this guy can be that X factor. He might not do it game in and game out. Like you said, Cole, it might just be one game where you finally realize it, where it all clicks. But I look at the rest of the offense, and there's just not a whole lot of viable candidates in my eyes to be that wild card, that X factor.
Interesting.
Because, Dylan Edwards, Jace Brown, you know what you're getting out of those star playmakers.
Well, I'm going to go answer this one based on that. We expect 0, maybe Lincoln Cure, to be good. We expect number 1, Jace Brown, to be good. Number 2, Avery Johnson, duh. Number 3, Dylan Edwards, yeah. I think Joe Jackson's going to have a big year. I think we're sleeping on number 4. I think he's going to be used in the backfield maybe more than we suspect, because they're going to do some fun stuff with Dylan. That's just a guess, gut instinct guess. But I think Joe Jackson's going to have a big year. I just do. I don't think he'll be setting records or anything, but I think he will flash through the year and prove, kind of like DJ Giddens did as a sophomore, that I'm here. I can do this. I can play. So that I think it's fun. This is a fun question for this team, because there is a lot of young talent, new players that we're going to see what happens. It's their time now, and it's time to step up. And guys have traditionally done that in Chris Kleiman's program.
Yeah, Joe Jack. I mean, that's an awesome answer. Just because I don't care how good Dylan Edwards looked in the bowl game, he's not going to be fed 20 carries a game throughout a course of 12, 13 game season. Somebody's going to have to step in there, and Joe Jackson makes all the sense in the world to be that guy. And Chris Kleiman, or Chris Kleiman's teams, there's never a true one guy in the backfield, right? Whether that's 70-30 or 50-50. Dylan Edwards can't do it all. He's going to need some help.
Joe Jackson's the same size as DJ Giddens. Isn't that crazy?
I find that hard to believe.
That's what they say.
I don't know. Next question from KSU Royals Cat. We had to edit your question because it was so long. You came in as KSU Roy. I don't think you want to go there. On the last podcast, you compared 2012 to this year's team. However, what also impacts the team's effectiveness or its opponents was the 2012 Big 12 as a whole more difficult, or is it in 2025? That's a really good question. I think removing Oklahoma, from the equation makes that 12 schedule probably tougher. I need to go back and look at who all they played, but I think the Big 12 was tougher for this reason. Maybe the teams weren't better, but the athletes at Texas and Oklahoma were different. They were. They could get those guys. And you don't see that as much, honestly, right now in terms of, defensive line and those type of positions in this conference. But I think there was a gauntlet to the Big 12 back then that, eventually K-State ran into the hurdle they couldn't clear at Baylor, mostly for reasons of injuries on that defensive side of the ball. So, I think the road was tougher in 12. That's another reason why I like this team in 25 guys, is because I think there's a path here. Do you have some tough opponents? Yeah. Tech's going to be tough. Utah might be really good again. They might turn it back around. So we're going to have to see how this whole season plays out. But I think it's a table that can be run by Kansas State if they can keep the focus all the way through, and it's extremely difficult to do.
The question is asking about the conference as opposed to the schedule. And so I think if we're looking at the schedule, it's a different answer, because this was in a time period where you played every single team in the Big 12, right? Like this was the 10-team Big 12. I believe I'm correct on that. You guys can tell me.
One true champion. Yep.
Yes. One champion, right? So you played everybody. You knew, okay, this is what you're going to have. And let's not forget, guys, that K-State would have, if there would have been a Big 12 championship game around, played in that game. There was not a Big 12 championship game in 2012. So that loss to Baylor pretty much ended any possibility K-State had of playing a national championship. Not saying that they would have still made a national championship had they won another game to get to that point, but there's still that possibility. I go back and I look at that schedule compared to what K-State has this year. They play a lot of the same teams. Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, West Virginia, Iowa State, and Kansas were all on that schedule. So the only teams that K-State's not playing this year is West Virginia. So that would mean that there would be 3 different conference opponents that K-State's playing instead of that. Now, you could make an argument that West Virginia, Oklahoma, and Texas not being in the way of K-State this year is a real benefit to them. But if we're just talking about conference, I think that the conference in 2025 is stronger than the conference in 2012, because there are those teams that you can go on the road to Utah, and it's not going to be easy. You're going on the road to Oklahoma State. That's not going to be easy. I don't think Texas was very good in 2012. That was kind of that era where they were starting to still try and figure themselves out. The 2012 Texas is not 2025 Texas. That's just the reality of the situation. So this is a really complex question, and it would probably require a little bit more research. But I'm going to say, because there's more depth in 2025, it doesn't have that top end talent like it did with Oklahoma. But because of the depth, I'm going to say that 2025's Big 12 is more difficult than 2012, and you have to win another game. Like that. That's also a really big factor in this. Is you have to win another game in order to be the champion.
Good point. You got to win one more. But off the top of my head, I don't have the schedule pulled up. But at OU and at West Virginia, I mean, in 2012, your Geno Smith, K-State blew the doors off of that team in Morgantown, and then squeaked out a victory in Norman thanks to some I don't want to call them fluky plays, but if you go back and watch the highlights of that game, there was a fumble in the end zone, and then the belldozer, your chief guy, right, Cole?
Yep.
Fumbled a snap in the red zone. And so, but K-State won the game, right? I don't know. Like, you look at Utah right now, that looks like a tough game on the road, but it's just so unpredictable now. And everything in the Big 12 in 2025, I mean, Kansas State, guys, a year ago from now, we're thinking that 2-game stretch with Cincinnati and Arizona State that K-State had last season, that's 2 surefire victories. And Cincinnati held to be true, but Arizona State was obviously a different story. So a lot more unpredictability right now in the Big 12 in 2025 is what I'm getting at. And whether that makes it tougher or easier, maybe that's for you guys to decide, to debate, but it's definitely different. It's a lot different.
Okay. Liked it a lot. Next up, Mountain Dew Cat 74. Will the K-State football program ever regain the level of success it achieved during the 98 to 2003 era? If yes, what would it take to get there again? If not, why not? They're capable of it. And in fact, I think the door's open for it. They're going to have another recruiting class like the one that are true juniors right now. They need another class like that. Maybe this is it, because outside of Avery, most of us didn't realize how good that class was when it took place. I mean, nobody on signing day was celebrating Austin Romaine. I just want to caution people that just because a kid doesn't carry many stars doesn't mean he won't be a star. And the staff has, in some ways, done almost a better job than what the Snyder era did. They're consistently getting 3 stars that develop into playing like 5 stars. And I think the talent is deeper and greater now than it has been. Yeah, I think they can get back there. But also keep this in mind. A secret sauce there was junior college recruiting. Because in that era, Bill Snyder was doing it and everyone else thought it was unsavory. That you couldn't win with those kids, that you were jeopardizing your entire program, bringing in these bad eggs. Well, because of what that team did and how they did play through so much greatness, bringing in junior college players, all of a sudden everyone started doing it. Oh, it does work. And now, you see up until the portal and NIL and all that kind of wiped out the JUCO programs, you saw every program in the nation taking a JUCO player. So it was almost like a cheat code Bill Snyder had for a few years there, where nobody else wanted these kids, and he was just scooping them out of junior college, 4 and 5 star type talents. Well, it's different now, and maybe you can find that through the portal, but I think this program has a real opportunity right now in this window to establish itself as the front runner in the Big 12 for a number of years.
It starts with recruiting, and I understand that. And Fitz, you hit the nail on the head there. Like, you don't have to have 3 or 4 4-star kids signed in your class in order for you to have a lot of talent on your football team. And the reality of the situation is that at K-State, every year or so, you're going to have opportunities. Now, are you going to be able to close on those opportunities? That remains to be seen. Some years are better than others. But if you typically can have a good class followed by an okay class, followed by another good class, an okay class, and a good class, then you start to stack ways to keep kids on your roster, right? Because at some point, those 4-star kids you bring in are going to want to play. And if they're not playing, then they're going to leave. And so it's a whole heck of a lot easier to tell a kid, hey, this kid's a junior. You're going to be a freshman. You can redshirt for 1 year and then play for 3 or 4, or you can come in, contribute sparingly as a freshman and be a main contributor as a sophomore. That's what K-State did these last few years with the cycle. That's what's going to happen with the 25 class. And so K-State is starting to stack classes, which means they're starting to stack talent. And if we're asking a way for K-State to get to where they were from 98 to 2003, it's what you're really asking is, can they contend at the top of the Big 12 for a chance to make the playoff every single year? I think they're very close to that. And if they can break through to that playoff this year, that could be the start of a nice, little era for K-State football.
Agreed.
Of course, K-State can compete for Big 12 titles year in and year out. But Fitz, you bring up a tremendous point with the JUCO players. K-State had an edge over everybody for what K-State did. You don't get that now with NIL, all the scouting, recruiting, everything. It's much more level. And I don't think there's any way K-State can ever gain an edge like that ever again. College football just evolved too much to get some sort of edge in that regard. But I mean, if you can go out and get a 5-star from Kansas and you can continue to dominate, or I don't want to say dominate, but if you can grab those guys locally, recruit Florida, Texas, wherever your hotspots are, and you get the right staff, there's no reason you can't go compete for a Big 12 title year in and year out. You're just not going to have as big of an edge as you once did from 98 to 03.
Yep, agreed. Gabriel's being kind of loud. He's got that saw going up there. My soundproof studio isn't so soundproof.
Well, it's not picking up on your mic, so.
Oh, I shouldn't have brought it up. Never mind. I just am hallucinating. Next question from Kat and Kahlo. There are no dominant preseason football favorites this year in the SEC, Big 10, or Big 12. Is this parity due to NIL? And does it make sense that it make it less likely that a super conference will form? I don't know if I'm not going to rule out super conference. I think Greg Sankey's determined to do it for whatever reason. I think the pushback's going to be stronger than what they expect. But yeah, I think talent is being spread around due to NIL, due to the transfer portal. Now that a kid like Jayshon Ross can, go to Alabama and decide, well, this isn't for me. I want to go home, and he can transfer and play right away. That year of sitting out was kind of a deterrent for a lot of kids to transfer in the past. Now they don't have to worry about it. And I think what we're seeing is an erosion of depth at the upper levels of college football, that they don't have that dominant second stringer that could start at other schools. They're gone and they're starting at other schools. And now they have their third guy is their second guy, and he's not as good. I always go here. These programs had a big advantage by getting the best players all the time. But I think their biggest advantage is when one of those guys goes down, the next guy up is of a higher quality than most programs have, and might be a higher quality of player than most programs are starting at that position. And that's just how it's worked. But now that talent is trickling out across college football. I think it's really good. I think the best thing to deter this whole idea of a super conference is for someone outside of those two conferences and not Notre Dame, someone from the ACC or Big 12 makes a huge push in this playoff, starts beating some teams. And then it'll be undeniable that there's been a leveling from the NIL and portal. And at that point, I would expect the SEC to work very hard to stop this, to make sure those kids are held captive at their programs and can't transfer. But I've said this also before, and I'm hopeful that the new guy in charge will apply the rules across the board, but the cheating is going to just start all over again. The SEC is going to go right back to cheating. I think it's in their blood, and I think that's what they entirely plan on doing now. They aren't as good as they were having the same rules as everyone else. They just aren't. Now they can go back to bending those rules and getting a foot up through, just flat out paying players beyond any NIL clearinghouse and just doing it. Here's some cash. The old days are going to be new days once again.
Is that a Shakespeare quote?
I think it is, yeah.
The answer to this question is not about NIL. It's about the transfer portal, right? Like that's really what it is. And, I think you're right to an extent, Fitz. Like those two things are tied together. But the reality is that if a kid is not playing at a certain school, I think a lot of kids would rather go somewhere and play. If they're making $75,000 at one school and another school offers them $60,000 or $65,000, but hey, instead of being the third stringer, you're going to start, that kid is a lot more likely to go there because these kids want to play at the next level. They're motivated by money. But this isn't college basketball where guys are making $5 million. This is college football where most of these guys are not making six figures. That's just the reality. Most of these guys are not making six figures. So when money is not as much of a pie in the sky, a lot of these guys would rather go where they can play. And so I think it has a lot more to do with the transfer portal. And you're right, Fitz. This is the way I look at it. Now at these big time programs, and I'm going to use Jayshon Ross as an example here. Alabama's going to have a incoming freshman who probably is at the exact same skill level as Jayshon Ross was last year. And so if one of their edge rushers gets hurt, instead of it being Jayshon Ross to step up and be the starter, they're going to have to go to a true freshman. Well, at that point, Jayshon Ross will have been better than that true freshman that they're bringing in. And so instead of going for a guy who was recruited just as highly rated, they're going to have a guy who's less experienced as opposed to having a guy who's already been inside of the program, who is a very highly rated player who's now at another institution.
I agree.
Really? That's all you got?
Only thing I guess I would add, Cat and Callo, to your point, I just had the odds pulled up in front of me. Like there is no clear-cut favorite period in college football to win the playoff, right? It's not just for a couple of these conferences, right? Like the whole playing field, not just within your conference, but to win it all. I mean, guys, I'd be curious 10 years ago, like I bet it was like LSU, Bama, there's a few, and there's a big drop off in the odds to win it all. Right now, you don't have that. There's a lot of schools up there, Texas, Georgia, that are, of course, at the top, but there's not like a big significant drop off after you get past a couple of schools.
Who is favored to win it all?
I think it was Texas at 550 on FanDuel.
Wow.
I think. Yes.
With the first year starting quarterback.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I'm not rooting against the kid, but I think it'd be funny if he wasn't that good. I just do. What's that?
I said it would be funny. I know the NFL, like people are saying he's a surefire to go, first overall next year in the draft. I don't even know if why would you want to go to the NFL, man? You're a college student making a boatload of money. Why not just stay and develop and get better in college?
Steve Spurrier made a great point. He said if Texas didn't think that Arch Manning was good enough to play for them last year, and the guy they played over him got drafted in the 7th round, how is Arch Manning going to go number 1 overall in next year's draft if Texas didn't think he was that good enough?
I agree. I totally agree. I think NIL will keep some of these kids in school, though. I saw some kind of podcast. It was NFL guys talking about they have a undrafted free agent rookie in camp from the SEC. The guy wasn't good enough to be drafted. And they said he made $1 million last year playing college football in the SEC, and he wasn't good enough to be drafted. So they're taking pay cuts if they're leaving early in some cases. It's insanity. Nobody wants to give me $1 million.
Helping Hands Remodeling?
I don't think Gabriel has
charge
it.
for an ad on this show, right? $1 million?
Yeah, millions of dollars, yes. Final question of this podcast, because there's more podcasts to come. Are some of the recent football recruiting losses simply the result of the team realizing certain recruits just weren't worth the money it would take to land them? Go Powercat. Cole, I'll let you have this one.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's as much about NIL as people want to make it out to be. There's definitely an aspect of that, but as I kind of laid out, right, like you're not going to go out and shell out a bunch of money for high school kids right now. That's not just K-State. That's a lot of places. Now, there are programs in the Big 12 who are spending more money on recruits than others, but I think that's a marginal deficit compared to K-State. So I do think that the recruiting losses, if you want to call it that, it's just not working out. Like K-State's won plenty of those battles in the past. It's not like K-State's recruiting is causing the demise of the football program, right? That they have not won some important recruitments. They definitely have won some this cycle, but they've also lost some. And that's just kind of how it goes in the recruiting world. And I don't think it has anything to do with money, to be completely honest.
Interesting. Gills?
Yeah, I know fans might think Chris Kleiman's the greatest coach and Taylor Bratt's the greatest recruiting coordinator in K-State, but there's other schools out there who have full-time, multiple full-time recruiting people and coaches, right? They're going after him just as hard as Kansas State is. And like you said, Cole, you can't win them all, man. I know the timing of it probably isn't great, but look at some of the recent wins that Kansas State has had on the recruiting trail. I'm not just trying to pump sunshine in here, but you can't win them all, man. You got to be real with this for a little bit.
There's so many elements here. It's hard to probably pinpoint exactly why they've fallen short on a couple kids. But I know this. They know what they want to do with their NIL, their rev share, those things. And one of the things they don't want to do is blow up the locker room with a player that changes the mathematics of who's getting what. I'm not sure that had anything to do with the choices we've seen from like an Ian Primer or anyone else, but they're not going to just decide, unless it's a really meaningful player like an Avery Johnson, to sink a bunch of money into a guy that is unproven. They're not going to do that, because not only does that disrupt what you're paying the more proven players, but it throws everything out of balance. If Kansas is really paying as much as I'm hearing for some of these in-state players, this is going to be interesting to see how other players in that locker room embrace that or don't. If it works, it's brilliant. If it doesn't work, it could be just blow up the locker room time. And I think K-State is being very careful about that. And I'm confident that they're not going to do anything that isn't financially feasible for the football program. But you never know. You never know. They might. I come back to this. I think they should only be spending big dollars on quarterbacks and nose tackles. That's it. Everyone else, unless there's a special player in your state, like a Lincoln Cure, everyone else, no. If you want that much money, you can go on down the road. We're going to maintain a team atmosphere here.
Good way of putting it.
That's it for this edition of the Powercat Podcast. Of course, we would like to thank Gabriel at Helping Hands Remodeling for being our sponsor. He was very loud, though, during this show and quite distracting to me. So, Gabriel, do me a favor. Dude, keep it down up there. Make sure you check him out. Go check out mhkremodeler.com, and we'll see you real soon with another podcast, including one on the 4th of July. There will be no fireworks. I don't like loud booms.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.